Welcome everyone to this exclusive NextSense Masterclass, Sensory Disability, Next Level Inclusion. In today's session, we're going to unpack the idea of inclusion, where we were, where we are now, and some tips on how you can be more inclusive. My name is Dr. Sue Silvera, and I'm the course director of the Master of Disability Studies at Macquarie University. We deliver this course in affiliation with NextSense, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by my colleague, Alison Hawkins-Bond. Alison is a qualified teacher of the deaf and has many years of experience working in the disability sector. Welcome, Alison.
Thanks, Sue. I'm very grateful to be part of today's inclusion conversation. I hope that you, the audience, finish this session knowing more about sensory disability and inclusive practice within the workplace, whether that's education or within the community. Now, we live in a diverse world, and an inclusive community recognises and values the diversity of all of its members, and our understanding of how we can achieve this is ever evolving. So how does sensory disability fit in with inclusion? Sensory disability means that a person has differences in their hearing or vision, and that may be because they were born with those differences, or they've changed as a result of an illness or accident, or just as part of getting older. And inclusion for this group means that they're supported through the tools and strategies to enjoy the same sense of community and belonging that we all deserve. So today we're going to touch on, first of all, the language we use when you're describing sensory disability, so that you can feel really comfortable in engaging with a diverse range of people. Next, we'll share some strategies so that you can use them in your personal and professional context to build an inclusive community. And then finally, we'll provide information on how you can gain qualifications to further your career in what is in this incredibly important area of disability. But before I talk about what is sensory disability and best practice inclusion, let's take a step back and understand where we've come from and the progress we've made. So, where we were. 20 years ago, children who were blind or deaf or who had additional needs were taught in separate schools. Many of them were in residential schools, meaning that they had to spend months or years away from their family. We had less technology options, so popular books like you can see on the screen of Harry Potter that were brailled for students who were blind would need volumes. But inclusion's rapidly changing. So Harry Potter and other books are now accessible in many ways, including refreshable braille, which replaces the many volumes of braille text that it took to read just one story. And where are we now? Well, we've become used to watching news events on TV with interpreters using Auslan, which is Australian Sign Language, and we've even got our first deaf Marvel superhero. And then there's availability of audio description, particularly on the ABC. It's commonly offered. And in all new TVs, there's included the option of audio description of the images for a person who has low vision. So it's really amazing, I think, to think, how far we've come and what has changed. But when I think about inclusion, particularly in relation to sensory disability and people with a hearing or vision loss, what we're really focusing on today is I realise there's so much more that we still need to do. Recently, I was contacted by a prospective student who was blind. The morning he phoned, he was at the train station and He'd wanted to find the male toilet, but he couldn't find the Braille notice at chest height where he was expecting to find it. So he had to stand facing the wall and sweeping his arms around in all directions to try and find the sign. And he was just mortified, by the derogatory comments and the name calling from some of the people nearby. And I could really hear his sense of humiliation and anger as he relayed the story. And this was all because he wanted to do something that all of us would take for granted, which is finding the correct toilet. And so his experience had motivated him to call and to find out about the Master of Disability Studies course, because he actually wanted to be an agent for change. And hopefully you're joining us today because you also want to make a change and you're looking to take your career to the next level. So perhaps, you work as a mainstream teacher and you'd like to work with students who are deaf or hard of hearing or blind and have low vision. Perhaps you're an allied health professional and you have clients that have deteriorating hearing or vision, and you're really wanting to feel more confident in knowing how you can better support their individual needs. Well, this is a great place for you to start. So let's talk about language. Let's start with language. One of the changes that we can all make is to show our respect for the students or the clients that we engage with by using the appropriate language, which has definitely shifted significantly over recent years. So in Australia, it's generally best practice that we use person-first language. You might have noticed already that I said a student who is blind or has low vision, or an adult with a vision impairment rather than a visual impairment. So when we're referring to someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, it's really important to ask them what their preferences are for describing their hearing loss, as they might prefer to use the terms hearing impaired rather than hard of hearing. Whereas with identity-first language, individuals express their cultural pride. For example, individuals who are part of the deaf community and use Auslan and may describe themselves as a deaf person, and that would be written with a capital D. So ultimately, it's really best to ask when you first meet someone, so that you can be sure on their preferences, so that the language that you use empowers the people you work with and their families, and it promotes a really positive attitude towards diversity and people with disabilities. Being responsive to diversity in allied health service provision requires services to be both universally accommodating as well as tailored to the particular population group. And in education, inclusion is based on the notion that schools should provide for the needs of all children in their community, whether the level of their ability, disability, educational need, or other forms of diversity. So for the next part of this session, we'll share some strategies through a couple of case studies that you can use in your professional context to build an inclusive community. So I'd like to introduce Matt. He has an inherited condition, which means that over time he will be blind. When you first meet Matt, you might be surprised how visually capable he appears, but don't make assumptions about how well he can see, because he's developed his own strategies to manage. Accessing literacy and sustaining the use of his vision over time is really challenging and tiring for him. So why do we need to listen to his needs? Well, we're adapting his access for when he can no longer use print. So we're building his skills progressively by introducing Braille and technology options. And it's vital to prepare him for his life after school, so that he has continued access to literacy, whether that's when he goes to university or starts work. And Matt will be in a difficult personal space because of his deteriorating vision. So it's really essential that we are organising for him this seamless access to technology so that he has an element of control over his life despite what's going on. So there's ways that you can find out from Matt what suits him, talk to him, don't make assumptions about what his needs are, and really think about, how you can make the environment accessible for him. So, become aware of Matt's needs, the need for good Braille, and perhaps go and look at your environment and ask yourself, is it appropriate? Would Matt be able to navigate around here? Would the access provided enable him to know what's in his environment, and maybe what could you do to make some improvements? Now we're going to meet Sam. So Sam is a qualified teacher and she's training to be a teacher of the deaf. Sam's part of the deaf community and prefers to use Auslan to communicate. She's got a severe hearing loss and had a cochlear implant when her son, who is also deaf, received his cochlear implants. You may be surprised to actually find out that Sam's deaf because she might not mention it, as her diagnosis of her hearing loss does not define her identity, and therefore she doesn't see it as a disability. So it's always good practice to ask adults that you work with, if they have any access needs, especially as everyone communicates in different ways. So some people speak, some people use technology, and some people use sign language. But because Sam's fluent in Auslan, she may have interpreters that she's worked with before that she feels really comfortable with. So where possible, plan ahead, because it can take up to a week to get a booking, secure preferences. And if the interpreter is going to be voicing Sam's signed comments, then she may prefer a female interpreter. Another thing to think about is it's always important to have clear communication. So only one person's talking at a time. So Sam can then switch her gaze between the person's talking and the interpreter who is signing. And always look at Sam when you're talking, not the interpreter, because it's her that you're having the conversation with. And before you start a conversation, have a look around and make sure that the lighting in the room's adequate, that you're not sitting in front of a window because that places a lot of shadow on your face and makes it difficult to lip read. And finally, it's really good to use high quality captions for any video clips or during meetings. And you can see that that's what we're doing here today. Automatic captions are available on many platforms now, so Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but just be aware that the quality on those is varied. So if we have a quick recap of some of the strategies for inclusion that you can implement now. Firstly, don't assume, always ask, and tailor your delivery to the needs and preferences of the person that you're working with. For a person who is blind or has low vision, you might consider, ways to build their independence in advocating for their needs, strategies that they have in place to manage already, and how you can provide seamless access to technology and Braille. For inclusion for a person who's deaf or hard of hearing, consider booking their preferred Auslan interpreters early so that you can make them feel comfortable. Think about clear communication lines with only one person speaking at a time, and ensure you've got adequate lighting, so full face visuals so that lip reading's easier, and really high quality captions for any video clips or online meetings. I've been in this field of disability for over 30 years, and I've been inspired by many change makers in the inclusion space. From Connor, a teenager who is blind and lobbied to have Braille put on Australian banknotes because he wanted to know how much money he was receiving without having to ask someone. And then Professor Greg Lee and all those involved in setting up universal newborn hearing screening in Australia so that every baby born can have their hearing tested before they leave hospital and be given access to the supports and communications that are needed as early as possible. So let's focus on the future. Imagine if the future of inclusion is something that is added in, not at the end of planning an inclusive environment, but that as part of universal design, we actually begin with considering the diverse needs of the individuals and how we can address those. So I'd like to share a slide with you that just shows what that actually means. So on the screen, you can see that there's 4 images, 4 pictures. So the first picture that's looking at equality shows a boy who is unable to see the sports game because it's blocked by the fence. And then we look at equity in the second picture. So the picture shows an adjustment's been made to enable him to actually be able to see the game. And then in the third picture, the reality shows that there's people with many opportunities, and then there's the challenges that are actually faced by people who have a disability that may impact their health or their work opportunities. And then the last picture, we're actually looking at liberation. So this is where what happens is that we're thinking about how we can be inclusive of everybody by actually changing how we do things. So the question I'd really like to leave you with today is, what are you going to do to be a change maker? So thank you for joining us for this session today, and I hope that you use some of the inclusion strategies that have been shared to help you make changes in your day-to-day work. So Sue, what's next for our audience?
Thanks, Alison. If this session has reaffirmed your passion for inclusive practice and you would like more information on how you can take the next steps to change your career and make changes for people with sensory disabilities, strongly consider studying the Master of Disability Studies with us. Delivered in affiliation between Macquarie University and the NextSense Institute, you will develop your skills and knowledge to really understand inclusion, how to practice it every day, and how to ensure people with sensory disability are always included. For more information about the course, visit the Course Finder web link on your screen now. Thanks for watching.